Can you comment on the role YMCA played in World War I home front?
Actually, I don't know as it was so much in the home front as it was overseas. Of course, all of these service organizations had a very strong presence. YMCA, YWCA, Salvation Army, Red Cross, all of those. And I think they worked on both sides of the Atlantic. They did certainly provide support to young men and women when they were in the armed forces over here, but I think even more so the role that they played in the actual battlefront, both in terms of hospitals, but also just in terms of services. I know the Red Cross in particular played a big role in just making sure that the troops got mail back and forth. Many people, I had a very interesting, I gave this talk up in Clinton recently, and a gentleman told me that two of his uncles had been in World War I from Clinton, and that what they remembered with greatest fondness, they told him when he was young, was not so much the Red Cross, but it was the Salvation Army. They said, oh, the Salvation Army helped us so, and they helped us with, particularly with food and with, incidentals that we just didn't have, I think there were a whole number of groups that tried to support the troops in various ways, and YMCA, was certainly part of it. Yes, Chris.
Oh, I was surprised. One of your first slides had the British Canadian Recruiting Office.
Yes.
That was taken in what, 1915?
Probably around there. We don't know the exact
I'm
date.
sort of surprised about that because President Wilson had declared right at the beginning of the conflict that the United States was going to be neutral
Right.
in not only thought as well as deed, but doesn't appear to be. I mean, it seems to me that if you have one of the belligerents recruiting in the United States, that the U.S. government would have said, no, you can't do that. We're neutral. It was just as, for example, the U.S. government allowed American bankers to lend what turned out to be hundreds of millions of dollars to Britain and France.
Yes.
Well, so, I mean, it seems to me that, I've been doing a little revisionist thinking on World War I and wondering just how neutral it was the United States.
Well, I would also say that on a personal level, on a private level, again, this is just a very small sampling, but I've been doing research for this exhibit on Mary Burge, and she had spent 5 years training as an artist in France between 1909 and 1914, and she made many friendships over there. All of her papers survive at the Name Historical Society. There are letter after letter of thanks from various people in France for the money that her family sent to them to help them pay for various funds and hospitals for the French troops. So who knows how much was going on like that, But clearly the American government wasn't putting a ban on it. I think your point's fair.
And also now, before the U.S. got into the war, were Canadian troops allowed to transit across Maine? Because I know their major demarcation point was Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Because as I recall, wasn't there an attempt by a German agent to blow up the bridge at Vanceboro?
Yes, at Vanceboro, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it would also be interesting to study the whole issue of whether there were any military transportation of Canadian troops out of Portland Harbor, because as you remember, one of the big reasons for that railway connection beginning in the 1850s was the fact that the Canadian harbors froze up, and they didn't have a way to ice break in those days. And the only way to England by steamer was out of Portland Harbor. So what was going on? Interesting. Yes.
My father was in what was called the Students' Army Training Corps at Bates. I understand it to be sort of a predecessor of the ROTC program. it was about a 3-month program. They were turning out second lieutenants because those were shaved tails, cannon fodder. They
Yes.
needed a whole lot of those over there.
That's right.
And as it happened, he was deferred for the summer because his father was a farmer. And so that was an important thing for them to get the harvest in.
That's right.
So he entered in September. His class, of course, would have graduated in the middle of December. His class actually escorted the previous class to the station to go to Boston on November 10th.
Oh, wow. That was close.
Which basically, they got to Boston, they signed the armistice, they sent them back.
That's right.
But my father was 30 days out from shipping over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with my father, who was born in 1899, he was 18 in 1918, and he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. But I guess the red tape was such that by the time they called him up, the war was over. I have all his paperwork, but fascinating.
And we actually have one of those panoramic, like,
Oh, yes.
pictures of the class.
Oh, wow. I'll have to come back. Any other comments or questions? Yes, sir.
The war bond is essentially a promissory note.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with the stamp. Is that a gift to the government?
No, the stamp was, a way in which to build a war bond. In other words.
Smaller denomination.
Smaller denomination. In other words, if you were either of a very modest income, or more so, it was for the school children. What happened was you got a little war saving stamp book, and every week you bought a stamp for a nickel, a dime, a quarter, put it in there, and the same thing happened in World War II, and even some of us remember doing that, in the 50s. And then ultimately, your book of stamps, the idea was it could be turned into a bond.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's how it worked. And it was the thing that I would just observe is about this period, it was so relatively brief in our history, but it was, and I hesitate to say this because, I'm not in any way making an observation on our present situation, but only to say that it was extraordinary how the country just so pulled together, and the economic increase. And the same thing, of course, happened in World War II for a much longer period. But the marketing, the government made the decision that the people, they would involve the people in the war effort, in every aspect of the war effort. There was sort of amazing amount of marketing done. And for the children, there was and I have one of these, there was a popular children's character in the children's book. I can't remember whether he was a bear or a fox or whatever he was, And they got the artist who was so popular for the children's book to create all the artwork for the war saving stamp campaign in the schools. And then you actually got a little card with, Brer Rabbit's, picture on it or whatever, if you saved up enough. Yes, Chris.
Well, one thing to consider too, World War I and World War II were declared wars.
That's true.
Which means that the federal government assumes enormous authority to restrict dissent, restrict civil liberties. And very shortly after the declaration of war, the Congress of the United States passed a very stringent Sedition Act, or Anti-Sedition Act, so that if anybody, and there were people who did not want to get involved in the war.
Sure.
And, they were locked up, they were harassed, there was certainly a lot of vigilante action.
Oh, yeah.
Against anybody who was perceived as a dissenter. So that was, and this is, probably there was a far greater mobilization support for World War II than World War I. But I think it's also important to note that shortly after the armistice, there was a real backlash. Hey, let's bring the boys home. Let's not get involved. And there was a lot of questioning during the 1920s, and you certainly see it expressed in the powerful isolationist trend before Pearl Harbor of, hey, this was maybe a mistake, or certainly there were some real downsides.
We're not gonna do this again.
Yeah.
That's why we were so unprepared for World War II.
Right.
And that's why we lost the Philippines and Guam and all these islands, because we were sending money to France and England, to England particularly after France fell, and more weapons and arms to Russia than we were sending to the Pacific to defend our soldiers in the Philippines. And that
Well,
is
wait a
why-
minute, no, the arms to Russia weren't going until after the invasion of
Well, it started
Nazi-
before
that was in June of
It started
41.
before. It started before.
Well, gentlemen, we could debate these issues all night, which is what a historical society is in part for. But in any case, I wanna thank you very much for this evening, and we'll probably be hearing more about all of this as we get closer to the 100th anniversary. So thank you so much.
Thank you.